Do you think that people across generations are thinking in this way about AI and its potential, or alternatively its dangers?
Whether you think something has agency will affect whether you hold that thing accountable or responsible legally and morally.
I've never been this productive, and in fact it's addictive and it's becoming a problem. I'm going to need some kind of intervention because I'm spending too much time with Claude.
This is AU in Conversation, a new video podcast from Adelaide University. In this episode, Vice-Chancellor Professor Nicola Phillips sits down with one of Australia's leading voices in artificial intelligence, Professor Anton van den Hengel, and postgraduate student Oliver Lack. Together, they'll unpack the role universities play in shaping an AI-enabled world and how our own Australian Institute for Machine Learning is beating Google daily. Here is Professor Nicola Phillips in conversation with Professor Anton van den Hengel and Oliver Lack.
Welcome, Anton and Oliver. Really pleased to be joining you today for an interesting conversation about AI. Thank you for being with me for AU in Conversation.
No, it's great to be here. Thanks for the flag.
Thank you.
AI has been described as the biggest gold rush in history, but also has vast potential to make the world a better place. Let's start with a small question then, Anton. What are your thoughts on that?
I've been wondering about this for a long time, and my answer keeps changing. So I was comparing it to, the beginning of the internet or the advent of computers, and as things grew, people started comparing it to, fire or the wheel. And I'm sort of halfway between the two. I think that we've got a massive tendency as kind of living in the moment, both to overestimate and underestimate the impact of the technology. Out of the world economy, there's a two-speed economy going on. There's AI, which is going crazy. Data centers are incredible, and there's this huge transition. There's a lot of money being made in that space, and the rest of the economy is kind of in recession, actually. At the moment, I'm somewhere between the wheel and fire. I think nothing will be the same. In much the same, my kids struggle with the idea that you might drive around with a book full of maps stuck in the door pocket of the passenger side of your car, right? And what would you do with this book of maps, and how would you operate it, right? When they are incapable of reading maps that don't turn themselves up the right way when they look at them and tell you exactly where on earth you are, right? This is how maps work as far as they're concerned. That's the transition we've just been through, right? But until recently, computers didn't talk, or at least they didn't talk effectively. The only things that we really dealt with that spoke effectively were human beings. And now we're at the point where the models actually speak, their grammar's better than ours in many cases. But they're, as far as I'm concerned, they're not intelligent, right? They're not thinking, they're speaking machines. My grandfather ran a pub in Port Adelaide. He was of the opinion that if you couldn't add the prices of 5 drinks in your head, then you weren't an intelligent human being, right? And that digital cash registers were the end of mental acuity as far as he was concerned, right? We were done. Human beings had reached their pinnacle. It was pretty much, like Euclid, Einstein, adding 5 drinks in your head, and that was the end of it. Really, what we've learned through all of those transitions is that humans are intelligent in a way that isn't just the same as machines. And we don't have the language for it, but this is an incredible power. It's an incredible transformative technology, and it's not going away, but it's also, there's a long way to go. Maybe that's a better way to say it.
I'm always struck in conversations about AI that it's often spoken about as if it's just something that's happening to us, that we live in an AI world now, that AI is going to accelerate, that it's going to take over really significant parts of our lives. And the language of gold rush seems to suggest the same to me, that it's something that we discovered, that we found, rather than that we as human beings created it. But surely if we have created it, that means that we have a choice about what kind of AI world we are
Absolutely.
for ourselves.
Indeed. And, AI is just a technology. It's, it's input and output on a computer somewhere. We could collectively, if we all wanted to, just decide to turn the whole thing off, right? We have the capacity. The reason that we're not going to turn it off is because the economic benefit that flows from it. And that's a function of our economy, right? And people miss the fact that economies are fundamentally about human transactions, right? They're an artifact of humanity. And we do have the capacity to control our own destiny, not just in Australia, but globally. And it's not going to be achieved by standing on the beach shaking our fist at the tide, right? King Canute had this idea that he could hold back the tide by going down to the beach and shaking his fist at it, and it didn't work. And it's the same level of effectiveness. Us here just complaining about other people's AI is not a means of control. But we do actually have our hands on the levers of the economy. And that's how you change the way that AI is the effect that it has.
And Oliver, are you optimistic about what AI can deliver for your generation, for your future? We often talk about the doomer or the boomer. I think that's the right expression, isn't it? Something like that, anyway. But does a future shaped so fundamentally by AI give you a sense of optimism, or do you worry about it?
I sort of interpret the question as, am I optimistic about humans? Not am I optimistic about AI technologies? It's going to be humans who decide which resources go into which technologies. But I'm optimistic that there's plenty of things that can benefit my generation and generations before me.
Yeah. And do you think there is a generational divide of any kind in the way that we think about AI, perhaps that's creating difficulty in, for many people in society in imagining what this future looks like, or do you think that people across generations are thinking in this way about AI and its potential, or alternatively its dangers?
Young people are usually adopters of technology faster, but there are some interesting trends happening right now where certain graduates of international universities are not adopting a positive outlook at some of the technologies. You see in viral videos of people booing at graduation ceremonies and things like that when AI is brought up. It's a really interesting phenomenon. I'm not sure exactly why that's popped up, but that's an example of maybe a difference in generational optimism towards the tech.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And of course, this is playing out in universities every day, Anton, a problem that, or a question, I perhaps shouldn't say problem, but a question that we are grappling with in some ways that suggests that this is a challenge, that this is a problem that we as human beings have to now address, and in some ways suggesting that it provides enormous opportunities for universities to rethink so many aspects of what we do to equip people well, in particular, to move into this AI future. Looking at what's going on in our university, in Adelaide University, do you think that we're well positioned to harness the power of AI, or do you think that we as a sector, or we as an individual university, still have some way to go before that power can really start to take hold in higher education or in the world of research?
I think Adelaide's very well placed. I mean, we've got deep AI skills and a history of ambition in this space, right? Adelaide's been a very ambitious university from the beginning. One of the best things to come out of the merger narrative was a focus on access, and access, I think, has been a critical issue for universities really since the beginning, or a lack of access. And the opportunity that AI offers is that everybody can have their own personal tutor. I've spent some time in Oxford and Cambridge, wherein, if you're a student in the right spot, then you and one of your classmates might go and have a 2-on-1 session with a Nobel Prize winner who will explain, thermodynamics to you. we have the same opportunity here, right? We can provide people with an educational opportunity irrespective of their learning style, their cultural background, their socioeconomic status. Right? We can tailor education to the individual and even measure it, measure achievement in a way that is personalised to an extent that just has never been feasible before. And frankly, most of the structure that we expect in university teaching in schools and universities is pretty much pre-Gutenberg at the moment. The reason people stand up and give lectures is because books were expensive. Right? There used to be a way that a lecturer would stand up, read out of the book, and everyone else would write it down. It was effectively a really slow photocopier. Right? And we are, the technology, we haven't kept up really with previous technologies, but I'm really hoping that this is a chance for us to do a better job of getting to students the way that they learn, because I think it's something we haven't been all that good at previously.
It seems absolutely clear that trying to wind the clock back and trying to pretend that AI doesn't exist and go back to more traditional methods of assessment is doing our students a disservice. This is the world that they are going to be living in for much longer than we are. But all you hear about AI in universities tends to be about assessment, tends to be about cheating, and particularly in the way that this is picked up in the media. I'm sure that you read the story as well, that was recently run in the Australian newspaper about a student, I think his name was Albert, who talked about how he and so many people that he knew had completed an entire postgraduate degree using AI. How would you deal with that? How would you deal with that kind of narrative, first of all, about AI, but also a student like Albert, who wanted to approach the use of AI in their studies in a very different way from the way that you've just described, Anton?
I think that we should either give Albert $100,000 and try to set him up with a startup and just let him go, right? Like, really, Albert sounds fantastic, and we should have 1,000 more Alberts as far as I'm concerned, right? Albert sounds like exactly the kind of entrepreneurial person applying AI that we need. But if Albert, for some crazy reason, doesn't want to start his own company with $100,000 we've just given him, we should turn around and hire him straight back into the university and get him to teach next year's course, because we need people who are moving with this technology, are figuring out how to drive it, and how to adapt is really the best thing about Albert's story is that he adapted so quickly, right? One of the challenges we have in AI is that there's this kind of idea from a lot of the population that everything's changing so fast. I think I've still got a handle on it. If you guys could just stop now, and we'll try to adapt, right? And that's completely, the rate of change is increasing, not decreasing, right? If you think that right now it's tumultuous, right, that we're struggling to keep up with the rate of change, just wait. Because there's no point teaching this generation of students to deal with this generation of technology. Right? The next generation of technology is going to be 10 times better than this. And we need more creative, focused, ambitious, dynamic Alberts out there, driving our economic future, right? Driving our educational future.
And how would you respond to somebody who said, but this is cheating? How can we possibly have confidence in the degrees that a person emerges from university with if they've cheated all the way through it?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. The idea that Albert's taken this technology and learned how to use it and developed skills that will be far more useful to Albert through his career than whatever else it was that he was supposed to be learning. And I'm all for. I think that there are things that people need to learn properly. Right? If you're going to do maths, you got to learn how to do some maths without a computer. Right? But we need to think about what it is that we actually believe we're teaching that's of value,
Oliver, jump in.
Yeah,
He really
please.
disagrees with me. He's much more conservative than I am.
I've got an Albert hypothetical for you.
Yeah,
I'd
okay,
love
good.
to. I'd love to hear what you think.
Yeah.
Albert number 2. Let's say that Albert number 1. I don't know the details of the story. Got these AI tools to draft him something that was passable, and then fine-tuned it a little bit and uploaded it, and that's how they got through their masters. Albert number 2, exactly the same, except instead of using AI tools, used contract cheating. So hired a team of humans on the other side of the world to draft them all their assignments for them, got those drafts, fine-tuned them, and uploaded them. Is there a difference between Albert 1 and Albert 2? Especially in academic integrity context as well. Do you think there's a difference?
So the reason that I think that Albert 1 is should be rewarded rather than chastised. And I agree with you, right? Albert 2 is just cheating. The reason that I'm enthusiastic about Albert 1 is because they've adopted new technology that's absolutely the latest, that didn't exist 6 months ago, and that capacity to adapt, I think, is fantastic, right? It's not the capacity to outsource, it's the capacity to adapt to the latest technology that I think is interesting. I mean, in the same vein, right? So what happens if Albert 3 then goes and uses ChatGPT in exactly the same way as Albert 1? And it's like, well, then really it's, you're starting to get towards well-trodden ground, and it's less interesting, and it's less shows less ability to exploit the latest and so on. And eventually it just becomes mundane. So, I'm not really saying that we should just have no constraints on what people use or how they solve these problems or how they write their assignments. But I do think that, I agree, right? There's really no point us standing there wringing our hands and saying, thou shalt not AI, because it doesn't work, and it's entirely counterproductive for a bunch of graduates who are going to emerge into an AI world.
Oliver, let's hear what you think in response to your own question.
I don't know. My gut wants to say that there's something wrong with the contract cheating scenario more than the technology. I can't put my finger on it though. I understand what you're saying, that Albert number 1 is showing skills with technology that's very valuable in society. It's going to help them in their career going forward. But the same skill in being able to gamify the system with contract cheating, it feels like the analogy still stands a little bit. I don't know exactly.
So if we shift the question from assessment to learning, Oliver, you're doing a PhD at the moment. You've also have experience as a learning advisor. What do you say to people who say that AI is undermining all of the skills that people need for deep learning, that idea of cognitive offloading from humans to AI, that something really powerful about what it means to be human is being lost here?
I think the brain is like a muscle, so you got to use it or you lose it. So the students that are using their brain while using the tools are the ones that are going to get the greatest benefit out of it. Instead of cognitively offloading tasks like Albert 1, maybe Albert 1 cognitively offloaded everything and didn't retain any domain knowledge. But I understand the emphasis towards the skills that he gathered and the technology he's using at the time. I have 2 ideas on how to deal with the cognitive offloading issue. One is around intrinsic motivation of students. So creating content that fosters some intrinsic motivation to actually learn the content. That's what drove me in my studies. Mm-hmm. But if you can create content that engages students to want to do it for the sake of doing it and wanting to use their brain for the sake of using their brain. The other way to deal with cognitive offloading, I think, might be what I call long-term content. So it's about explaining to the student how this particular content is going to be valuable for them in the long term, in their careers in the future, whether it's a skill or domain knowledge or something. There's another step too, sorry. You got to explain it to the student, but they also have to believe that this thing that I'm learning in this particular course is going to be very valuable for me long term. And so you don't necessarily need intrinsic motivation to learn that content if you believe it's going to be valuable. They're two potential ways I can think of dealing with the cognitive offloading.
And Anton, what do you think? Do you think we're losing something here that is deeply valuable about the way that human beings learn and that human beings take joy in learning? Or is it just another process of adaptation, as we have done all the way along, whether, as you say, it was with the advent of the calculator or the advent of the internet, where so much information is just at our fingertips? Will we see in a couple of generations' time that human beings are simply learning differently?
Yeah, absolutely. I was there when the calculator came in, right?
So
And
was I.
and all the arguments about how it was going to mean the end of people's ability to do maths. And it turns out arithmetic is not a precursor of mathematics, right? Mathematics has continued, despite the fact that we all know how to use calculators. And at the beginning of Google, right, everything's at your fingertips. Why would anybody learn anything? The same nonsense happened, right?
But reading and writing and the skills that are required to concentrate and immerse yourself in, whether it's in a novel or in a PhD for 3 years, 5 years.
I think certainly reading and typing have become ubiquitous, right? The illiteracy rate is pretty much zero these days because everybody's got a phone and it's their primary means of communication, right? It's almost impossible to be functionally illiterate as a child anymore. But the bigger question about how we're going to proceed, in science, for instance, right? If it's really just a question of asking Claude to do our learning for us or whatever, my personal experience is that I've never been this productive, and in fact it's addictive and it's becoming a problem. I'm going to need some kind of intervention because I'm spending too much time with Claude. Right? Claude and I have developed a bit of an unhealthy relationship, and I'm using 8 Claudes at a time to do my work and have never been this productive, and I'm working 12 hours a day because it's that addictive being this productive. And that process has some names around the place. It's called being an AI vampire by some, which isn't a particularly good name for it, but nonetheless, it's a recognized position that actually the technology makes you so much more productive that it's addictive.
But you're worried about being a vampire.
Well, I'm worried about balance in my life, right? But I really am so productive. It's crazy. And so there's a bunch of related questions at the moment, right? So who's going to start the first billion-dollar company with one employee is one of the questions that's going around at the moment, right? And the next question is, who's going to start the first billion-dollar company with no employees?
Oliver, this raises a lot of really important questions then, not just about the future of work and the future of professions and the future of skills, but about the future of what it means to be human in this kind of world. This is what you're working on.
Yeah. I'm working on anthropomorphism, how people attribute human-like properties to non-human things. And so it sounds like you might be treating your Claude army like a software engineering team. Have you got the headset on and you're talking to them yet, or are you still typing, or
That's
what's
just a
the
function of embarrassment.
Okay.
But I must admit, I have been shouting at it.
Yeah, well, you're getting emotional, so
Yeah,
maybe you're
that's it.
anthropomorphizing it.
Indeed.
The dangers of having too many human-like Claudes is anthropomorphism. The consequences are not going to come from real artificial consciousness. I don't think we're going to have a solution to the hard problem of consciousness anytime soon. I think we're going to see more people perceiving consciousness and agency in these machines and then changing their behaviour based on that very quickly.
So you're obviously aware of the comments recently of Richard Dawkins, leading evolutionary biologist and author, stating that he believes that AI has a consciousness after spending 3 days communing with a chatbot, which sounds a little bit more modest than your experience, Anton. But I'd love to know your views on that. And first of all, whether you agree with him. I think you've indicated that you don't, or that you would not like to. But what the consequences of this kind of narrative about AI might be in terms of how people understand AI and understand the AI world and seek to engage with AI.
Yeah, there's a lot there. On the Dawkins example, some people are very surprised by Dawkins being such a prominent skeptical figure coming out and saying these things. I'm not surprised for two reasons. One, he's prone to anthropomorphizing in the past. One of his most popular ideas is about the selfish gene. It's really used as a way to communicate or explain things in that case. But a lot of people are using it to understand the behaviors of various objects or machines or whatever.
And why does it matter if most of the population do anthropomorphize AI, believe it to be real, believe it to have consciousness?
Yeah.
So what? What are the implications of that for human beings or for our society?
It changes behavior, essentially. Yeah, there's sets of behaviors that will change. So whether you think something is morally significant will affect whether you have a propensity to harm that thing or protect that thing. Whether you think something has agency will affect whether you hold that thing accountable or responsible legally and morally. So we're going to see these types of sets of behaviours to do with moral agency and moral significance manifest in different ways. Exactly how are they going to manifest, we're not sure. A real world example might be the increase in AI boyfriends and girlfriends. It's a huge trend internationally to seek some sort of psychological relation with a machine now. Very popular. The effects of that, the carryover effects to psychological relations with other humans is huge. You're suddenly spending a lot more time, you're a lot more satisfied. Some people are reporting being a lot more satisfied with AI relationships over human relationships. It's worrying, but we're not sure exactly if that's a positive thing or a negative thing. According to some of the theory we have on anthropomorphism, we could actually mitigate loneliness and increase well-being in people by providing them with systems that act human-like. I'm not sure if I buy it yet.
So this takes us into the territory then of the ethics of AI and the sorts of ethical and moral frameworks that we have to construct around AI, both in society and also in universities. Anton, what's your view? Is this something you worry about?
No, not at all. There are ethical questions involved in every period of change and every agent of change, but the ethical question is about how we manage the change. It's not about the technology. The technology involved really doesn't make any difference. What matters is the behaviour. So we don't legislate about internal combustion, right? There are no rules about internal combustion. There are rules about, we've got speed limits and seat belts and stop signs and a whole artifice of rules about cars, but it doesn't make any difference if your car is petrol or electric. What matters is the behaviour. It's not the technology that mediates it. And I've yet to see an example of anything of any behaviour that is AI, where it would make sense to legislate against AI in that sense, right? Almost everything that AI can do, absolutely everything that AI can do, a human can do, just slower. Yeah, and we do have a bunch of things that we don't protect society against, kind of because we don't need to, because it's either too slow or too expensive for humans to do it. But humans could do it if they put their minds to it. And we may thus have to adapt to the fact that we've just democratized some of the most powerful technology in history. ChatGPT, when you go and you type in your question about the Bee Gees or whatever it is, the power that you are accessing in that system is the most complicated thing that has ever been available to an ordinary human being. Cars are complicated, I don't know, there's other complex things that we deal with, but that is the most powerful, general, flexible, complex system that we've ever made available through a command line. But in the end, it's a human that's doing it. The the machine has no agency, right? It's not sitting there, kind of conspiring, right? It's not coming up with dastardly deeds that it can achieve when we're not looking at it. Because if you're not looking at it, it's stopped. It's actually not just stopped, it doesn't exist, right? While you're not typing into ChatGPT, that instance of the large language model doesn't exist. So all of the evils that might come of it are mediated by humans, not the technology.
Oliver.
That lack of autonomy at the end. What about as systems gain more agency and autonomy, like Claude bot, or where there's constantly iterations going in the background, and you're giving it more access to other systems around that socio-technical framework. Like what happens then? Is that enough to push people to believe that thing has agency, even if we haven't got a clear definition of what agency is? But is that I'd like to know what you think about the Claude bot thing as agency and
I'm a
autonomy.
big fan of OpenClaw, right, which is this process where it runs by itself and repeatedly, but all that's really happening is that the model is starting in a loop, given your instructions. It doesn't have any agency. It doesn't have a goal. It's not trying to take over. It's not trying to hide under a rock. It's not trying to make sure that it can put the washing out for next Wednesday, right? It's just doing whatever you tell it, and in the most shallow way possible. So if there is agency, if that process is applied towards the purpose is human, right? It's set up by a human towards a human goal. And the only alternative really is that it's random, right? There's at least as currently formulated, AI has no agenda, right? It doesn't have the capacity for it. It hasn't got any driver for it. But there are a whole lot of people out there trying to make a whole lot of money out of it. And that's an agenda, right? That's the challenge, right? It's people using it to achieve their own nefarious ends is the problem. And the response to that is human, not technological.
Can I bring this back to universities, just to finish off this discussion? We could be here for hours. It's absolutely fascinating. Thinking about how universities have to adapt, how university education has to evolve, Oliver, what do you think the most important things are going to be in the future that a university education is going to provide to people in this kind of context? What do we have to be focusing on?
Radical structural change.
Yeah.
Not just structural change to assessments, but structural change to how the system works, for reframing it around what is the goal of higher education.
Yes.
So we need to get clear on what the goal is. I think from our conversation, leaning back towards skills and giving students the skills they need, rather than focusing on domain-specific knowledge and content, focusing on the skills that students need to succeed in whatever they end up doing. So structural change in the way that you verify somebody's parchment, and also how you go about assessing a student throughout a degree. I think the future of learning, there's going to have to be some radical change there, not just change to assessments, but change to maybe the grading system or how students organise themselves to gain those skills, whether it's like peer-to-peer learning systems or things like that. I hope that universities around the world start trying really radical ideas like this.
And what advice would you give to students who are approaching university education in this kind of context? What would you tell them they should be, while we're all in this process of adaptation and evolution, what would you tell them they should be hoping for from university education, trying to achieve during their time at university?
I know exactly what I would say. I noted it before, intrinsic motivation. That you got to figure out what is going to foster intrinsic motivation in you. Find the course that's going to work for you. Do a bit more research than the average Joe on what's going to keep you motivated throughout the whole program. That's I think the number one.
And Anton, what advice would you give to vice chancellors and other people who are trying to figure out how the very idea of a university has to adapt in this new world that we're entering.
I try not to give vice chancellors advice if at all possible, but I think it's a fantastic time for education and for institutions that want to grasp the future rather than try to hang on to the past, and that doing so, finding new ways of enabling people to learn how to learn. Right? The reason to come to university was never that you would wind up with a certificate at the end of it and that somebody would stamp the fact that you understand enough of the rules of thermodynamics at the end of it. It was that you would learn how to learn. Right? Nobody was expecting that knowledge would freeze at the point at which you left university, and you could just operate on that, that box of knowledge that you took home with you. It's always been a process of learning how to learn, and that we've just all become far more powerful as individuals driving our own learning how to learn. The challenge for universities is how we're going to enable that, and we still have to have some kind of assessment. I mean, don't get me wrong; it's part of the value that we offer.
And of course, one of the most exciting and important things for us as Adelaide University is that we have the Australian Institute for Machine Learning, and many other research groups and initiatives working precisely in this kind of area. How does that help us for the future?
So AI is transforming every field. The future of science is in AI. There's new mathematical discoveries coming out that have been stalled for hundreds of years that are being solved by humans with this technology. The technology is going to be fundamental to every aspect of society, but as a nation, we have to be more than just users of this technology. We can't be you can't build a technological advantage. You can't build a competitive advantage by downloading technology from overseas. We have to be in a position to drive our own agenda. And that means leading in developing the technology itself. Right? There is a narrative, unfortunately, in Australia that we can't compete. Right? There's this idea that OpenAI and Anthropic have too much of a head start on us, and we are too small a nation, and we just can't compete, which is insidious and unfortunate, but also just wrong. We can compete. We compete all the time, and we win. Right? So the Australian Institute for Machine Learning is one of the best AI groups in the world, and every year we publish 300 papers that beat the state of the art in AI. We compete against Google, and we compete against Meta, and we compete against OpenAI, and we compete against Anthropic, and we win. And we do it day after day after day. So what we do for a living is to beat Google. Right? We're entirely capable of it. And so the reason that the Australian Institute for Machine Learning is important isn't just because we publish more papers than other people or whatever. It's because it's like a beacon that says we can do it. Right? We're not second rate in any way. We have a first-class education system, right? We are a wealthy nation. We can do this, and we do it. And really part of what holds us back is this self-defeating narrative that we seem to have somehow.
And Oliver, in terms of the environment in which to do a PhD, presumably this is really important to you. It must have played a part in your decision about where to do your PhD and what to do your PhD on.
Yeah, I saw that AI was going to be the future, and I think I've made a good bet in doing my PhD around AI technologies. And also within the institute itself, I was lucky enough to do an internship before I started my PhD and saw the culture within the institute as well, not just the academic science side of it, but the teams within the institute, how they work together, and also the multidisciplinary side of it, not just doing computer science, but all the other health clinicians, psychologists, cognitive scientists, all this other expertise from different disciplines coming together to advance AI technology is pretty amazing about the Institute, and I'm really grateful that I get to be part of it too.
Yeah. Obviously, the aspiration of the university, as I talked about it before, is to blaze a trail in understanding AI and the span of research on AI from all sorts of disciplinary perspectives. How well positioned do you think we are, Anton, at the moment as our university, and perhaps as a sector as well, but as our university in being able to achieve that over the coming years?
I think that we've got the skills. There's great stuff happening. The stuff that's happening in quantum physics, in the iPads, right? The stuff that's happening in sensing, particularly, is amazing. There's great stuff happening in some of the biology schools as well. There's wonderful things happening all over the place, and I only really know about the ones that are mediated by AI. The willingness and the enthusiasm of people to leverage this technology that is unlocking problems that we've been staring at for 20 years is amazing.
And the remarkable thing is that spans the university, not just in some of the areas that you've mentioned, but also right across into the social sciences and the sorts of areas that you work in. Oliver and Anton, it's been a joy talking with you both. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
If you found this episode valuable, share it with colleagues, students, or anyone thinking about the future of learning and work. We'll return next month with another episode of AU in Conversation on the Adelaide University website and your favourite podcast platform. Thank you for listening. We look forward to continuing the conversation.